Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Angela Brennan and today I'm bringing you Spellbinders Clear Stamp and Die of the Month, August 2024, Colorful Expressions Blossom. It's a really cool set where you can make an entire card set with just the dies and stamps with this set. I start off by showing you the coordinating dies that come with the stamp. So you've got the slim rectangle die that can die cut all of the little sub sentiments that will support the main sentiment, which is for, you, and hello. I start off by picking out a ink blending color combination that I want for the background, and I've got this set of color combinations of distress oxide inks that I have, and I'll put a link to the description below so you can get all these color combinations. And this is how I store my foam pads in little acrylic drawers, so it's easier for me to get to my foam pads when I want to start ink blending. And as you know, as I've mentioned a few times, the key ingredients to ink blending, there are 3 of them. So you need to use the right paper, which I use the Strathmore Bristol Smooth card. You need to use domed foam pads. So I've got a dome foam pad for each of the ink colors here, and I store them in my acrylic drawers as you saw. And you need to make sure that your ink pads are nice and juicy. So even if you do get just a few colors, make sure you get the refills with them, because it's really not fun trying to ink blend with a dry ink pad. You will not get the right ink blending that you need. Just keep ink blending, use a lighter color to ink blend it, and between the various colors, and you'll get a lovely ink blending. And I'm going to do some embossing on these ink blended backgrounds. I leave it aside to dry, and now I'm going to do some stamping with the clear stamp of the month. So I'm going to use that arch flower, and I'm going to put some anti-static powder onto my card because I'm going to do some heat embossing. So I place the stamp onto the door of my stamping platform, and before I do any stamping, I use the stamp conditioning eraser to remove the sheen that's on top of a new stamp so that it can absorb ink. And I'm placing some clear embossing ink because I'm going to use some embossing powder. Once the clear embossing is placed or applied onto the stamp, I put it onto my card, and I make sure I press it into the card with my stamp press tool and sprinkle the card with some superfine gold embossing powder. So you can see how beautifully the embossing powder will attach to all the embossing ink, and I'll use a peg to make sure I don't burn my fingers, and I melt the embossing powder with the Wow dual speed embossing tool. I still love seeing how the embossing powder melts when I put the embossing tool against the embossing powder, and always heat the back first so I don't blow off the embossing powder on the front. I'm doing another version of it, and I'm going to use my VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, and this is a pigment ink, so I'm always like to set it with some clear embossing powder, and this is a super fine clear embossing powder which I'm going to put onto the VersaFine Clear Nocturne stamped image, and again melt that clear embossing powder with the Wow embossing tool. And I always use the second setting here when I want to melt the embossing powder. The first setting, I generally use it to dry my watercolor paintings or watercolor images when I want to. So here are 3 images, and I'm going to use it on various cards here. I die cut the images with a coordinating die, which is so handy to have because you can die cut a few additional layers to layer it up, and then you can have a little bit of a dimension. So the gold embossed image is going to go onto that background, and here I've got a different embossed image which I'm going to use the black embossing image. So here, rather than color it individually, I'm just going to do some ink blending of the stamped and die cut image of the same color as the background. Now initially I want to put the colors against the embossed ink against the background, but then I flip it and you'll see the results when I assemble the card. Here I'm using a dry cloth to remove all of the inks onto the embossed side, because the embossed parts of the image will resist the ink, and therefore it's easy enough to wipe off the ink from the embossed side. What I'm doing now is I'm initially using some Distress Oxide ink to paint onto the flowers, but then what I do is I remove the color quite a bit when I press a dry cloth onto it, and I eventually do use the Distress Oxide, not the Distress Oxide, the Distress ink of the same color, to add a little bit of additional color, because the Distress Oxide inks are quite chalky and they're quite pastely. When I use the Distress inks of the same color, they're a little bit darker, and I think Distress inks are probably better if you want to use it as a watercolor, if you like. So that's probably what I'll do. I just want to try the Distress Oxide inks. I thought it was a bit too pale, too pastely, and I just wanted to add some additional color with the Distress inks. And you can see me do that with the peacock feathers, and you can see how it adds a little bit of a darker shade to the center of those blossoms. And I do the same with citron, twisted citron, as well as the villainous potion, just to add a little bit of color. And it's so easy to use the Distress inks as watercolor. Just smoosh it onto your work surface and then add some water with your brush and just put that onto the image, and it just adds quite beautifully and easily. And you don't really have to take much care, because the embossed image is already so detailed and beautiful after you've die cut it, that you just need to add the color, and there you go. So when I'm going to add a little bit more detail to these blossoms with my Uniball Signo broad gel pen, or white gel pen if you like, you just get a little bit of dots and a little bit of lines to the center of those blossoms to give it a bit more detail, and then you get those blossoms stand out a little bit more. Now to the background of this ink blended background earlier, now that it's dried, I'm going to use the Spellbinders Splatter White Opaque Watercolor, and I'm going to do some splatters. I put those splatter white into a glass dish here so that any spares is not wasted, so I can always hydrate it by adding some water to it. This is the Hand-Drawn Lines 2D Embossing Folder of the month, and I'm just putting it through using the recommended instructions for a 2D embossing folder, and I just love the way that it looks against the ink blended background. Here I'm using the same Distress inks, but I did the background with Distress Oxide inks, but I'm doing some coloring here, I've learned, by using the Distress inks of those same colors, and probably a couple of shades darker for the center of those blossoms. And I'm really quickly, without much care, you don't have to really do much with it, because as I said, the detailed stamped image is beautiful enough. So I'm just adding some color wash to those flowers and leaves, and I'm going to adhere that to the dry embossed ink blended background. So because of the ink blending, the dry embossing background, and the detailed stamped and die cut image, there's really not much to the card. And I'll also take the sentiments or create the sentiments from the same clear stamp of the month. So you can see you've got the image, the sentiments, all in one stamp set. And I love the fact that it's so easy to put them together. Now you can see me getting some slightly darker ink, Distress inks, to add the center of the flowers. I like using Distress inks to color the images to match the background. This is not even a watercolor card, and it goes on so well. It's a 300 GSM white card that I use to do most of my die cutting and stamping and die cutting, and it just goes so well. I'm using some Distress ink Mode Lawn, really little bit of it for those leaves that is part of the composition. I did think of using Seedless Preserves. I think I forgot, and I decided to just go with green, because I think Seedless Preserve leaves would have looked good as well, because it's in the background. But yeah, it still goes well with the composition. You can either add some additional die cuts at the back of the die cut, or just put some strips, foam strips, to adhere it to the card. This is another color ink blended background, and here I'm going to do some embossing with a 3D embossing folder of the month. which is Floral Expressions. It's really, really pretty. And I'm just going, and initially I'm thinking I'll color the image with just some Distress Oxide inks. Really bad idea, but it's all about trying, isn't it? I don't think you should color the images or stamped images with Distress Oxide inks, or maybe not these colors. I didn't like the end results of it. So I decided to just stamp and die cut another image, and I colored it with Copic markers. So I do not give up. Even after putting the initial colors on the flowers, I'm not really happy with it, but I still go on and try further. I try to salvage it, if you like. That's what I do. And then in the end, I'm not happy with it at all. So I decide to discard it and use and do it again. And it's fine to do that though, because crafting, creating a card, it's not a linear process. Sometimes you think you do something and it doesn't quite look as good as you want it, and then you put it against the background. I think it looks a bit washed out, or you may like it, but I didn't. So I decided to do another image, and I did some Copic coloring. You can either use Copics, you can use chalks, you can use watercolor, you can also use color pencils. So really, you can use any coloring medium. Just try to kind of go with the background. You could even leave the background plain, as in plain white, and have a really colorful colored image, or have a really colorful image as I have, as in the blended background, ink blended background. And maybe I didn't even have to color this image. I could have just left it stamped in silver. So it's really up to you. When you do these kind of images, you can be as creative as you want. I decided to go with ink blended backgrounds because if you've been watching my videos, you know I like ink blending. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when new videos are uploaded. I do lots of Spellbinders Clubkits videos every month, and at the end of the month, I tend to put it all into a playlist so you can get to the playlist of all the Clubkits of that month quite easily for your reference. I also do video tutorials of Spellbinders core collection of the month. I may be a little bit slow in bringing them out, but I do bring them out in the end. I really hope you do enjoy them. Do leave me a comment and let me know what you think of the videos. I'd love to hear from you if you got a question or if you just want to say what you think of the videos. That's how I can improve. And of course, if you enjoy the video, do let me know. So it's always nice to get some validation on the work you've put out there. Here I'm just using a Versamark clear embossing ink to stamp the sentiments. I'm going to be stamping them with silver, superfine silver embossing powder to match the embossing that I've done on the image that I've Copic colored. So it all goes together well. I think the blues and teals go well with the silver embossing, so I'm going to continue that. And these sentiments also have coordinating dies that come with clear die of the month that goes with a clear stamp of the month. So just use the coordinating dies, die cut them, and I always die cut extra so I can layer them up so that there'll be some dimension when I layer them onto the front of the card, especially when it's an embossed, dry embossed background. It's nice to have some dimension so your sentiments are a little bit thicker, sometimes a bit like a chipboard. So I tend to put 2 to 3 layers so it's nice and solid when it goes onto the front of the card front. So I always ensure that I have a T ruler available within my craft space so it will aid me in placing my sentiments onto the card front. The last thing you want to do is mess it up in the last minute. So here I'm going to layer the embossed image or the embossed Copic colored and die cut image with the image that I didn't really like earlier. So it gives me a little bit of a dimension. But I also end up using an A6 card. An A6 card is quite a common card dimension in the UK. It's 10.5 centimeters by 14.8 centimeters. And I always emboss ink blend and emboss a card or a card size that is slightly larger than the card front I'm going to use. So it's easier for me to place it onto the card front so I know it'll be nice and flush. So I just need to cut off the excess. That's an easy way to do it. So here I'm just putting some liquid glue onto the image where I've already backed it with some additional die cuts of that image, and I'm just going to press it down onto the dry embossed background. And again, as I mentioned, I use a T ruler to aid in the placement of the sentiments so it doesn't go wonky in the last minute. I do like using Spellbinders club kits because all of the club kits go so well together, and that's why when I store my club kits, I do store them by month unless they are sentiment heavy, and then I will put them separately because I will tend to use the sentiments more often than not. But in saying that, sometimes when I do an embossed image or a plain-ish image and I want to get some additional accents, I do look out at the previous month's club kits for some flowers. So this month's large die of the month has got some nice flowers that you can add as accents to future cards, and I'll feature that in a video that will be upcoming soon. And here are all the image cards that I've created. As you can see, there's a bit of a theme. I've done some ink blended background, and I've dry embossed two of the backgrounds, and one of the backgrounds I've just put some splatter, and you can see I've flipped the die cut image so the purple is at the top, so it doesn't just blend into the background. I think I like it better that way. And finally, this is the image, or this is the card you saw me put together with the 3D embossing folder background on the ink blended background. And I loved how all these three cards turned out. They're quite vibrant because of the background, and I like that the image just kind of blended with it. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Do give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when a new video is uploaded. Happy crafting, and I'll catch you at my next video. Take care.